This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own move. Carrington.
Hello. Welcome back to North Pod. And how do we lose that? I'm recording this the day after, and I am still unsure. And I sort of know, but in a much more real way, I still do not know how he managed to lose that. Thanks for coming back to listen. If you are tuning in after the West Coast game, I am so sorry. I have genuinely no answers. There were several times where it looked like we'd sewn that game up and somehow we still found a way to lose. And boy, look, I did try to look at it a little bit more logically. It hurts from a momentum perspective. We were playing so well across the second part of the year, and it would have been great to get another win to really shore up that momentum. But of course, it doesn't really mean much in terms of the ladder and the draft. We're more or less locked into second last place now, barring some kind of miracle in either direction, to be honest. Really, the Tigers would have to win 2 games, or we'd have to win 2 games by significant margins for things to change. So it looks like it's pretty sewn up there. I think, trying to look at the positives, the win last week against the Tigers is at least, it meant that we've gone 1-1 in this stretch where, ideally we would have gone 2-0, but at least we haven't lost them both. Yeah, that helps a little bit, but gee, it was a really deflating way to lose. And I think the only positive is that, at least we weren't searching for our first win in X many weeks. If it was more like that Sydney game from last year where you just go, how on earth did we lose that game? Where in that context, we were really searching for a win. Here, at least, we won last week. We had a couple of wins not too long ago. But yeah, it's a bad way to lose the game. Let's unpack it, regular podcasting style. Let's try and get through it and figure out where it all went wrong. Let's start with team selection. Not a heap of changes, which you'd expect after a win. It was out Dylan Stephens and Jaden Stevenson, the Steve brothers. Both of them out with little injuries. Looks like it could be short term, so potentially both of them could be back next week if things go okay. And in came Liam Sheezel and Miller Bergman, with Zane Dersma going back to the substitute role. And yeah, I mean, not a lot to unpack there. Liam Sheezel really comes in and plays the Dylan Stephens role, and Jaden Stevenson was replaced by Miller Bergman. Given Steve-O played a lot of that the last game off half-back, it was relatively like for like there. The only other notable thing there was it was Jai Simpkins' 150th game, which is fantastic. We've had consecutive weeks with the captains hitting milestone games, with Elmac hitting 200 last week. You do wonder if Bergman's coming in to kind of show a little bit of that potential for the future. He's not out of contract, but is someone who's struggled to get into the senior side this year with both form and injury. Thought his game was okay. I'm not really going to talk too much about him in the podcast because he was fine. He mostly did his job, but was part of a defence that really struggled. And I feel like we know what we're going to get from Liam Sheezel. So he was what he is, a pretty solid contributor without changing the world. And yeah, potentially we could see Stephens or Stevenson back next week, depending on how their injuries go. They're pretty minor. Let's have a look at the match result. It was, as you would probably know by now, North Melbourne 14-13-97, defeated by the Eagles 15-12, 102, a 5-point loss. And yeah, that was a goal for Oscar Allen in the last 15 seconds or so that sunk the game for us. In terms of how the game went in general, we had a bit of a shaky start. The Eagles got off to a good start, but about midway through the first quarter, I thought we got back in control, and really we controlled the game until about midway through the third quarter. At that point, we got out to a lead of 35 points, and it looked like, whilst it didn't look like we were going to go on and absolutely belt them, it did look like we were going to go on for a comfortable win. We should have gone on for a comfortable win from that point, but if you Well, watching the game, you will know the moment I'm talking about. There was an absolutely horror moment midway through the third quarter, sorry. Elmac has possession. He's on his preferred left foot. He was facing towards goal and then turning, defensive goal that is, and then turning towards the wing. And yeah, as I said, on his preferred left foot, just shanks a kick coming out, or that should have, been sent to about 70 or 80 metres from goal. It went out on the full inside 50, like it was a real shank. I don't remember who took it, but I do remember that was then the kick was centred to Jake Waterman, who then kicked a goal. And at that point, the momentum of the game completely swung the other direction. We'd kicked the last 7 goals, so that was a real drought breaker for the Eagles. And yeah, the momentum just completely swung the other direction. Oscar Allen, up to that point, didn't have any goals, and then he kicked 3 in that third quarter. That moment had real Daniel Howe vibes from last year. I remember a game late in the season. It was Zeebel's farewell game against Richmond. And Daniel Howe has had an absolute, I don't know what he was trying to do, kicking out defensive 50, but it was a shocker. I think that one went out and was called deliberate, and then Richmond kicked a goal from that point, and it just swung the momentum completely. And yeah, that's how this one felt. Even so, we did manage to steady and then hold a nice lead until late. So we sort of stemmed the flow eventually. And then still, yeah, we're sort of comfortably in front until quite late in the last quarter when the momentum swung straight back the Eagles' way again, and we were just unable to stop it. Some really fantastic efforts from Cripps with a dribble goal. Gaff took a fantastic running back with the flight mark that allowed him to kick it deep, and then Allen kicked one from the goal line to win it for the Eagles somehow. And yeah, it was a heartbreaker. You could see kind of disbelief on our players' faces, and there were just so many mistakes that we made late. So I guess that's how the game kind of transpired. If we look at the story of the game, I think there's 2 big things to unpack. The big one I just spoke about, the Luke McDonald turnover really gave the Eagles a sniff. We'd kicked 7 in a row. The Eagles they'd had some missed shots. It wasn't as though they weren't having any impact going forward, but we'd kicked the last 7. It did look like we were in complete control, and that it gave them life. It gave them that opportunity. We'd been able to that point to really put a lot of scoreboard pressure on, but then unfortunately, it was like a pressure release. And I do think it's unfair to put all of that on McDonald, because sure, it was a shocker kick. He allowed them that goal, but then I do think as a whole that our team the pressure released slightly. We allowed them back into the game. We allowed them to have some really good inside 50s. And we'll talk about it, but they were extremely efficient inside of 50, which, might be our worst game team defensively for the year, which is saying something. Maybe you could look at the second half against Collingwood as well, but yeah, they just really, really smashed us. And unfortunately, with the game on the line late, this is the other key part, I think. We led by 15 or so points. Again, it should have been a comfortable lead there. We just were simply unable to create repeated stoppages or control possession at all. That the Eagles were just able to, play on the edge, to bite off those sort of low percentage but high reward plays, and we just were not able to, get a stoppage or take a mark so that we could slow the game down in that last 5 minutes. We weren't able to wrestle back that momentum at all. It had all the signs of a group that just hasn't been in this situation often enough, haven't been in the lead often enough, and didn't know how to respond. And that is where you'd love players like Liam Shields and Simpkin, Luke McDonald, Aidan Core, even LDU, like the senior players. This is where they should have, with their experience, been able to, just do something. Give us something that either, like I said, gave us a stoppage, take a mark. There was a moment where Luke McDonald spilled what would have been an intercept mark. And it was a tough mark. It wasn't like he spilled a gimme, but that's where you need your leaders to stand up, and we just didn't have any of our leaders do that, unfortunately. There was some luck involved as well, don't get me wrong. There was, elements of the game where you just go, gee, I can't believe the ball bounced that way, or, that kind of thing. There were some unlucky parts to it, but ultimately, the fact that we led by as many goals as we did says that we did a lot wrong. And there's so many things that we could take out of that last 5 minutes. And even some of our best players, didn't have great moments, I think. Like Xerri, I think probably could have been a little closer to Oscar Allen when he kicks that last goal. Sheezel made an error late. Like, no one, I think, escapes culpability. It's a team responsibility. But yeah, it was really, really tough to watch. Given that we'd done pretty well on the clearances around the ground all day, we lost control of clearances in that last quarter, and it just looked like we weren't able to defend at all. So yeah, really super deflating, disappointing way to lose, but hopefully there's lots of key takeaways from it because, we're not in a position where it actually matters for our season. I think that's what we have to keep telling ourselves as fans. It's really hard because we've lost so many games, but if we're going to lose games like this in this manner, let's learn the lessons now so that when we're playing off for the top 8 or we're playing off for a top 4 spot, we've hopefully got some of these learnings locked away, and we can actually turn a 50-50 game into a win in those situations. So yeah, that's probably the story of the game wrap up. Let's have a look at the 5 stars, the 5 best players, the 4 best North Melbourne players and the best opposition player, all going towards the North podium at the end of the year. And for me, Tristan Xerri was a very easy best on ground for me. I think he was the best on ground. You could probably argue that with the influence that Oscar Allen had in the second half, that he might challenge him. But Xerri was immense. He had 30 disposals, which is a career high for him. 6 marks, 4 of those were contested, which we know has been a weakness of his. 12 tackles, 33 hitouts, 5 of those to a direct advantage. 13 clearances, 6 inside 50s, 23 contested possessions, which was clearly the most on the ground. Even chimed in with 3 spoils. He did a little bit of everything, and I think it was possibly the most complete game that I've seen him play. He's had some really, really good games this year, but yeah, he was unlucky not to get in the votes last week, and I could not go past him for best on this week. His composure by hand was fantastic. He's gotten so good at knowing when he can take possession, get his arms free, and get a handball out. I don't think now he's trying to do more than he should. He kind of knows his limits. He's hand passing off to those players that can give a bit of run and carry, but he's kicking it long when he needs to. And yeah, like I said, he's marking it around the ground too with those 4 contested grabs. It's actually unbelievable, the player that he's become. I did think that last year I saw signs in him. I wasn't one of those people that thought he was a shocker. I thought that given the opportunity with Goldie stepping away, and with a free run it with injury, I thought that he had a chance of being a solid ruckman. But I certainly did not see him becoming this dominant or this quickly. And I think he is a legitimate All-Australian chance. I think he's an absolute certainty for the squad. Typically, they'll probably pick, I'd say, 3 ruckmen, maybe even 4 in the squad. So I think he's a certainty for that. But I do think he's a genuine chance to be the All-Australian ruckman. I think the challenge, of course, is that we're going to finish 17th. And so it's really hard to find a spot for players in the All-Australian 22 when there's 18 sides. And so, on average, you're thinking that the better sides are going to have a couple, and that leaves not a lot for the worst sides. But, I honestly believe that he's a strong chance. I'm not going to get too caught up in it, because I think there's always an element, kind of like the Brownlow, you've got to build some consistency over a period of time, which, is not how it should work, but it is how it does work. So I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the squad this year and then has to press his opportunities for next year. But yeah, he had a phenomenal game. This is definitely the tape that I would be submitting for your All-Australian selection, I would say, Tristan. 3 votes. It got a little trickier. I think these 2 are definitely the next best 2. I've given the 3 to Sheezel. He had 31 disposals, 2 goals won, 7 tackles, 4 clearances, 6 inside 50s. He had 10 score involvements, which was the equal most on the ground. The only thing that let him down a little bit was his disposal effectiveness. He went at 58%. Some of that was, his long kicks down the line that ended up in turnovers. That's not necessarily his fault, but I think on balance, he had a super impactful game. He bobbed up in those moments. I mean, we know what he's like. He knows exactly where to be. He can find the footy. And this new version of Sheezel, where he's playing in this front half kind of role, I think is far more damaging than he had been off half back. Unfortunately, he did get a bit of an injury that seemed to hamper him a little bit. Clarko in the presser didn't give too much away. He seemed to think that he'd sort of had his ankles stomped on or bruised in some way. So hopefully there's not any bone breaks and hopefully it's just a bit of discomfort. But it was a little unclear. It seemed as though, well, he did go into the rooms and came back out. I don't know, but I suspect he had a bit of a jab to try and get him through the game. So I do hope that there's no long-term damage there. And if there is, let's put him away for the rest of the year. We don't need to risk any kind of serious injury to Sheezel. He pushed through and still did some fantastic things. I thought some of his work in the last quarter was phenomenal. He won a clearance with Liam Duggan draped all over him at one point. Like I said, bobbed up for the 2 goals. He's phenomenal. We know exactly what we're going to get from Harry every week, and I thought, similar to Tristan, I think it's going to be really hard for the All-Australian selectors not to put him in the side. I again will not be surprised if he doesn't find his way in. He's a certainty for the 40 in my mind. I think they're the 2 North Melbourne players that deserve to be in the All-Australian squad of 40. And I think Sheezel is probably fighting for a spot on the bench. But yeah, he's had a phenomenal season, Sheezel, again. And yeah, I hope that injury is not too serious. And then 2 votes I've given to Colby McKercher. I think you could have... there'd be an argument that you could swap Sheezel and McKercher around, but I think just given the front half impact of Sheezel, I gave him the 3. McKercher had 37 disposals, so racked up a lot of the footy. 5 mark, 684 metres gained, which was clearly the most on the ground. Had 6 score involvements and went at 89% disposal effectiveness. So just did what he does from the back half. Made some great decisions coming out of the back line time and time again. He had 15 to quarter time. So at one point it looked like, if he kept that up, he was on track for 60. Obviously cooled off a little bit, but still found plenty of the footy. And, there were times there where it just looked like the North defenders were trying to find him as our first, second and third option. And then if he wasn't available, then we'd just boot it long. He was fantastic. Never overawed. Tried his best to find an outlet coming out with that kicking style that he has. It's bizarre the way that he kicks the footy. And I watch him quite closely because you often get that behind the ground or behind the goals vision with him kicking out. And he loves to veer off to his right, which would be the preferred side for a right footer. And then just at the last moment, he'll kick it on his left. So he almost feigns like he's going to kick on his right, and then he'll do a little chip kick on his left foot. And there must be some strategy to it in terms of creating space for his left side, but it just looks so unnatural, but he gets it right, 99 times out of 100. So I'm certainly not going to suggest to him that he changes his strategy. There's so often that I feel like he's putting his body in a situation which makes it hard for him to kick a decent left foot kick, but he does it anyway. So yeah, good on him. He's another fantastic game. We know that accumulating the footy in the back line can sometimes be a little easier than doing so up the ground, but in terms of the role that he's being asked to do, he's nailing it. He's finding options, and when he's not able to find an option, he's booting it, or he's running and then booting it long and getting the ball out of the dangerous area. So a great game from the Kerch. Fantastic to have him back from that little injury that had him out for a couple of weeks. And then the 1 vote was a little tricky. I think Tommy Powell can probably consider himself a little unlucky. I will talk about Tommy Powell later on. Bryn Teakle was also solid. He kicked 2 goals and had some solid ruck work. But for me, I've given the 1 vote to Paul Curtis. And let me preface this by saying Oily Paul did not have a good first half. He was back, or he was having one of those games where nothing was going right for him in terms of his disposal. He was finding the footy, he was finding it in dangerous spots, and then wasting it. So he ended up with 3 goals, 4, which speaks to his wastefulness. 15 disposals, 7 marks, 3 tackles, had a goal assist. But it was his last quarter that got him there. His second half was much better than his first. That's where his goals came. And he had a huge impact on what should have been winning us the game late on. He kicked a couple of goals. He intercepted a ball coming out of defensive 50 and looked dangerous, looked far more composed in that in the second half, kicked one on the run, which was from deep. It was one of those ones where he probably had less time to think about it, so he nailed it. But yeah, juxtapose that with early on, his finishing was really challenging. He made some poor choices, had a dribble kick that he should have just run in on goal. That dribble kick obviously missed. And in general, just missed a couple of goals that spoiled a really great build-up, and so could have built a much larger lead in that first half if it wasn't for his inaccuracy. Like I said, we kicked 14 goals, 13, and 4 of those points were his. So if he had managed to snag 1 or 2 more of those in the first half, it's a different story. You have to imagine he's probably ended up with 5, and we run away with the game. So look, up until that last quarter, he was nowhere near the votes, but I thought his last quarter just dragged him up. He had such an impact, and I don't think he was responsible for that last quarter onslaught. I think that he did his part up forward to try and win us the game. Just a reminder to Paul that he does need to oil up appropriately. He was oiled up. I think he could have been more oily, and I think if he had been, we're not talking about this, and he's probably getting the 2 or the 3 votes because he's kicked 5. So we love Paul nice and oiled up, and I don't think he was quite oily enough yesterday to have the impact that he wanted. In terms of the best opposition player, I have to split it. I mean, Jeremy McGovern and Oscar Allen were equally damaging in different ways. McGovern kept them in the game. He was the one that kept them just in touch in the first, 2.5 quarters, had 25 touches, had 13 intercepts, a couple of contested marks, and kept Larky quiet whilst also having a really big offensive impact. So, he, I thought, kept the Eagles in the game. But Oscar Allen was the one that then, when the momentum shifted after that McDonald turnover, he won them the game. Had 14 touches, 5 goals, 2, 5 marks, 2 contested, had a goal assist. And all of that came in the second half. He kicked 3 in the third quarter, 2 in the last, including snapping the match winner, like I mentioned earlier on. And was massive reason as to why West Coast were able to be so effective in the forward half. So, I couldn't split those 2. Allen's probably the match winner. McGovern's the match saver, if you want to look at it like that. But they were definitely in both, in the top 5 game players on the ground. I still feel like Xerri was best on, but if you had McGovern and Allen after him and then Sheezel and McKercher, I think you're probably getting a sense for how the game went because, McGovern and Allen were massive, unfortunately. In terms of what the North podium is looking like now with only 2 games remaining, and Harry Sheezel has guaranteed himself to be at worst equal first. If you have to imagine that he's going to poll a vote across the last 2 games, just given his season. So I think it's his to lose. The only way that potentially that doesn't happen is if he's injured and he misses the last 2 games. So I guess that's a wait and watch. But he is on 42 votes and 8 clear of LDU and Xerri, who are both on 34. Either of them are going to need back-to-back best on-ground performances, with Sheezel not scoring if they are to tie the number 1 spot. So I suspect that next week we'll be awarding it to Harry Sheezel. Below them, Tommy Powell 12, Zerha McKercher 11, Charlie Comben 10, Wardlaw and Larky 9. She's LDU and Xerri have been consistently a long way ahead all year and deservedly so, I think. Like I said, we wait next week to see if Sheezel can officially wrap it up as a solo winner or if he's going to potentially share it. But like I said, it's going to be tough, I think. Right about now, I like to just give a quick call to arms. Please share the podcast out with any North Melbourne fans that you know. It's been a long season. I really appreciate everyone's support with helping me get the word out there. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service. Leave me a review if you can. I'm happy to read out your review, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you listen, and get involved with the show at NorthPod Show on all social media. You can also support the show on the Buy Me a Coffee website. All the details for that are in the show notes. And I really appreciate everyone who listens and supports the show through Buy Me a Coffee. It's been an amazing season. Got a couple of games left, and I really appreciate the support of the North Pod community. It's been another fantastic year. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for sticking by the club and for sticking by the podcast in what can only be described as another pretty tough year. Let's have a look at the positives and negatives. As you can imagine, I've sort of already talked about the biggest negative from the game in that the way that the momentum swung in that third quarter and how that happened. So I'm not going to go over that. That's really, that's where the game was lost. But I think there are some other things to talk about. I do think tactically we made a bit of a mistake going into the game in terms of our defence. We were just a little too small. Given West Coast has kind of got those three tools, they've got Darling, who certainly plays tall. Oscar Allen is and plays tall, and Jake Waterman also plays tall. I think we were one tall defender short. Luke McDonald really couldn't handle Jack Darling. Now, whilst Darling didn't have a big scoreboard impact, he took some really great, impactful marks in that wing area and just out-muscled Luke McDonald. I just think that had a big impact on the way that the West Coast was able to transition the footy. So, whether that was deciding to play pink in defence or whether or not we had to find, another option to play tall, there's only so much you can do with the cattle you've got. So I get it, but I don't think having Luke McDonald play that third tall was the way to go. Maybe we needed to have Archer playing that third tall instead, but I think it's you're subbing out one undersized player for another there, so I don't know that's much better. Chom on Allen worked until it didn't. Charlie Coleman was able to compete and take some good intercept marks, and did a bit in the first half, but Allen really got on top of him in that second quarter and second half rather, and the game was completely turned on its head. So that's not a slight on Chom. Defensively, we know he's got a lot to work on in his game in terms of being a defensive-minded player. He's see ball, get ball. He can intercept, and sometimes doesn't quite know when to go for the punch and when to go for the intercept. I thought Core did a solid job on Waterman, but by the same token, Waterman also was a little inaccurate. Kicked 1 goal 4, I think. So if it's a different accuracy, it's probably a different story for Aiden Core. But I think the last quarter really spoke for itself. The Tools were able to get on top and kick some goals, unfortunately, which ruined the game for us. And as a result, I just think our defense for this game, we were torched. There's no other way to describe it. Our efficiency inside 50 was slightly up on what it normally is. We went at 45.8, so let's call it 46%, and we're averaging about 42, 43%. So we were about on par. The Eagles' efficiency inside 50 was 74%. So they went inside 50 17 times less than us, but pretty much every time went in, they were scoring. It was kind of ridiculous, to be honest. 42 inside 50s, and they scored 37 times, and they also had a couple that just didn't score. So that's a massive concern for our defensive 6 or 7, but also the midfield group that's allowing it to get there that quickly, and the forward line group that's allowing the ball to exit our forward line too quickly. This was, I think, our worst defensive performance as a team for the year, and that statistic is the reason why. That's an awful number. Like, West Coast's average is 48%, so they're up significantly on the year average. And I think part of that is we went in too small, but a lot of it was also we weren't able to impact the contest when the ball did hit the ground. So that's how, for example, Oscar Allen was able to kick that winning goal. There were so many times where Elliot Yeo kicked a couple of goals where we just weren't quite able to get enough pressure on him when it mattered. There was just so many moments where the ball hit the ground in the West Coast forward line and we weren't able to do anything about it. And it wasn't hitting the ground, it was often getting over the back and being marked sort of behind the main contest with a West Coast player waiting there uncontested. There was several times that happened throughout the game. So, I think for the whole side, there's going to be a million clips worth watching just in terms of, adjustments that can be made on defence because, sure, Archer took some good intercept marks, Chom took a couple of good intercept marks. There were some great defensive wins that I'll talk about in a minute, but holistically, it was a really, really poor team defensive game, and to me, that's the big reason we lost the game. Not necessarily, we were pretty on par for our efficiency inside 50, so I think defensively is where it was lost. Another negative was Larky just being unable to get any separation from McGovern all day. Larky ended up with 1 goal, 12 touches, 3 marks, but I mentioned McGovern's stats before, 25 touches, 6 marks, 13 intercepts, was able to nullify Larkey and also have a massive impact on the game. If you nick Larkey in this context, you either have to be taking McGovern out of the dangerous areas, or you've got to have a much larger influence yourself. And ideally, you're trying to do both of those things. So, sure, they weren't matched up to each other the entire day. There were certainly times where Teakle was matched up on McGovern, trying to take him out of the dangerous areas, but that was the main matchup there, and that's okay. Like, Larkey is allowed to have a bad game. He still had a relatively solid season, not quite as strong as last year, but pretty solid. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if it's not going your way, you've got to find a way to try and at least nullify your player and take him out of dangerous areas, and Larkey just wasn't able to do that. Unfortunately, McGovern was far too good on the day, and he's one of their most senior players. He's been a fantastic defender for a long time. It's not a slight on Nick, but that again is another reason why we were unable to win the game. And I just think tactically, mentally, skill-wise, we were completely outplayed in that last 4 minutes. And that's ultimately where the game was lost, in that despite some deficiencies defensively for the whole game, and despite, Luke McDonald's massive error in that third quarter and the momentum swings, despite all that, we still led by nearly 3 goals, or 3 kicks rather. We're up by 13 points. So to concede 3 goals like that really late just showed the immaturity of the group. Whilst a lot of things went right for the Eagles during that time, so many missed chances for us. I mentioned it earlier, McDonald nearly took an intercept mark late. We got a half clearance out to no one out of the middle, which then allowed West Coast to grab it and kick the ball forward. And Andrew Gaff then takes a mark running back with the flight, which was a fantastic mark. I think it was Liam Shields was right on top of him, but he still took it. But then his kick falls short, and somehow Allen finds enough space to snap a goal from there. There's just so many little moments that you look at and you go, what could we have done slightly better? Even Cripps, who had 3 players hanging off him when he kicked the goal, the fact that none of those 3 were able to impact the kick enough to stop him from scoring. There's just a lot of moments there where I don't think our desire and our want to defend was absent, but our execution was just off. And like I mentioned earlier, I would have loved to see the leaders stand up there. I know that late on, Jai Simpkin kicked one off the ground where he should have just tried to pick it up, because then even if he gets tackled, we've got a stoppage. We needed to create more stoppages late in the game, and we just were not able to do that, and we were not able to defend the onslaught. The Eagles just rolled the dice, and it came off a couple of times for them. So a lot to learn out of that last 5 minutes, and I hope that everyone from the players, the coaching group, is just reflecting on how they could have impacted that part of the game differently. The last negative, most important of the day, the Fox audio needs to get it sorted. I understand you got to have that crowd feed. You got to get a bit of a sense for what the crowd's like. But in the first half, all you could hear was this screaming into that crowd mic, and I think they must have turned it down the second half. I didn't notice it as much, but get it right. That's obviously the biggest negative of the day. Really impacted my viewing experience, and to be honest, was much more disappointing than the loss. That's. They've got to get that right. I feel like that same thing has happened before in Hobart. It must be something about that venue. But yeah, let's get that right. The fans don't need to hear that screaming. The positives, because there were some positives to come out of the game. I thought our contested marking was fantastic once again. This is a consistent theme over the last month or so. We had 16 grabs for the game. Tristan Xerri had 4 of them, Teakle 3, Pink, Larkey and Chom 2. So that's all the big fellas getting involved. That's what you want to see. That's why you've got the tall timber. We've seen Jackson Archer's been able to do a bit of that lately as well. But yeah, to have 16, we had more than West Coast, and to have our big players, our tall players getting it done for us is fantastic. Super helpful for those bailout kicks and intercepting the opposition bailout kicks. That's kind of what you want to see. Like I mentioned, Archer didn't have any of those contested today, but was able to have a couple of intercepting ones, and that gives you a different avenue as well. But I think Xerri's the one. Xerri's the one where if he can take, it doesn't need to be 4. If he could take 2 or 3 contested marks a game and maybe one of them is forward or in defence, and the other ones are on that wing where he's marking a bailout kick. It just makes such a massive difference to how we set up around the ground. Toddy Goldstein was never a massive contested marker, but he was good for one or two where you'd go, great, Toddy's taken that contested one at half back, and now we can set up to try and transition and get the ball forward. And in the first part of the year, we weren't able to do that through Xerri, but now that he is starting to clunk a few on the wing or at half back, it does make a massive difference. So I do hope that the contested marking is something that can continue into next year. It's been a weakness of ours for a while, and so it's fantastic to have the big fellas getting involved. Teakle's the other one. I think he is a little bit underrated in his marking ability. Kicked 2 goals today, one from a free kick at least, but yeah, the fact that he's able to take a couple of clunks is making a massive difference too to the way that we line up and the way that we're able to transition the footy. So great that that's been able to continue. I mentioned earlier on, like, our defensive desire and our effort was certainly there, and we had some really big defensive wins throughout the game, which, I thought showed our desperation and not wanting to be walkovers, even though at times these efforts were unrewarded. So some of the ones I'm going to talk about now were rewarded. I thought Robert Hansen Jr. had a fantastic run-down tackle in defensive 50 that won a hold of the ball and saved what looked to be a certain goal. I think that might have been the third quarter. That was a massive one. Aiden Core twice had some fantastic wins. He had a great run-down tackle inside 50 that saved a goal that impacted the kick. And then another where he probably got a little bit of a fortunate bounce, but won a massive one-on-one and then helped rebound the footy. So he had some good moments, Aiden Core, and I thought, like I said, really, really tried his best and was probably our best taller defender. Waterman wasn't able to have the scoreboard impact that Oscar Allen was, for example. And I just thought our pressure around the footy and around the ground was great up until the last few minutes where we weren't able to execute that pressure well effort. We lost the tackles by 56 to 57. And in general, we didn't allow the Eagles much room to move. So I thought our desire and our effort was there, but it was the execution that was slightly off late. But like I said, there were some of those big moments through Core and Hansen Jr. Showed that we really wanted it. We had some good smothers as well. Will Phillips had a good smother. Like, we were trying to do the dirty work. It wasn't a game where we were just checking out and hoping it happened for us. But yeah, there's definitely some technique and some tactics that we can improve in terms of the way that we're defending. And that's whole team. That's not just the back seven. That's everyone, I think. Tommy Powell is going to be my third positive, and I did mention him earlier. I thought he's probably the most unlucky, or he is the most unlucky to miss out on the top 4. I thought, it very easily could have been him in place of Paul Curtis. Just his ability to hit the scoreboard and impact from the midfield is, a massive positive. He kicked 2 goals, 26 touches, 7 marks, 6 clearances, 5 inside 50s. So filled the stats sheet. The 2 goals came after another. I think it might have been the second quarter. A massive scoreboard impact for him. He's kicked 9 goals for the year now. So I do hope that next year we can move him towards being more of a, nearly a goal a game kind of guy. If he could finish the year with 20-something goals, I think that'd be fantastic. He is our one genuine midfielder that can play a half-forward role and hit the scoreboard. He's kicked 2 a couple of times now and obviously had some singles as well. But yeah, I think he's the one that's got a bit of forward craft and can also obviously go into the centre bounce and have an impact. 6 clearances is a good result for him. I know that he racked it up at half-back the other week and, that was a good experimental role for him. But I think moving forward, he's a rotating half-forward mid-option. He knows where the goals are. And hopefully he's able to finish off the season the way that he started. He started fantastically well. Middle part of the year, I thought he trained off a little bit, but he's also been good the last couple of weeks. So I do hope he can finish it off in these last 2 games, kick another couple of goals and potentially, cement his role as that really dangerous half-forward midfield option because, it's great to have those midfielders that can do something else. Like Wardlaw, I don't think is necessarily that type. Will Phillips, if he sticks around, I don't think is necessarily that type. But Tommy Powell is. So that's valuable to have. He had a fantastic game and was pretty unlucky to miss out on the votes. And yeah, I was actually when I was trying to look up how many goals he'd kicked for the year, I was a little bit surprised, but I guess I wasn't also to see that he's played every game for the year, which, makes sense because we know at the start of the year he won that battle between Will Phillips and Lazaro to be the best of the young mids, but it hadn't occurred to me that he hadn't missed a game. So despite his output going a little bit up and down throughout the year, I think it's fantastic that we've been able to get him through the year. He's played every game and he's had a pretty good impact for a young player, and definitely his best season of footy, which is fantastic. That, I think, is going to do it for the game wrap-up. Super, super disappointing. I don't want to glaze over that. It was a really tough watch, a really tough way to lose, and I saw plenty of people, understandably upset on social media. I totally get it. I just think after the initial disappointment, I went, great, we've thrown away a game. At least we've banked 3 for the year prior to this. The season doesn't matter. So, great. Obviously, we want momentum going into the off-season, and that's important, but what can we take out of this game? What can we learn from this game so that this kind of thing does not happen in the future? I think that's what I'm hoping we can take out of it. The old cliche is you learn a lot more from the games you lose than from the games you win. So I certainly hope that we learn a lot from this game. Let's put it out of our minds now because I don't want to think about it anymore. The only I didn't mention it earlier on. I probably should have mentioned it. There's a fair bit of spite and a fair bit of argy-bargy with Harley Reid. I'm not too sure whether that was a directive from Clarko or not, but Jackson Archer was getting stuck into him. Cam Zerha got stuck into him and gave away a free kick at one point. There was a fair bit of spite in it, which I didn't mind. I enjoy the physicality. I like if you go out and decide you're going to target a player fairly. So long as you're able to keep it in check. I think we probably went slightly overboard and gave away a couple of free kicks that we didn't necessarily need to. But I guess you could say it worked. I mean, Reid really didn't have an impact on the game at all. 12 touches he had, and like I said, not a lot of impact. So you might call that a tactical win, but I think it's important that we make sure that's not at the expense of giving away free kicks and 50-metre penalties, because that's where I start to get a little bit frustrated if it encroaches over that line. But anyway, that was probably worth a mention earlier on in the podcast, but I didn't have it down in my notes to talk about. In terms of other stuff from the week, the VFL, we've got a bye, so nothing to talk about there. The last VFL game for the year is next week against Southport, and we are going to miss the finals, so it'll be the last game for the year. I just lost a couple too many of our games late in the year to get in, so hopefully the VFL game next week we're able to go out with a victory. 2 pieces of news from the week that I've got no doubt you'll have caught up on, but I'll quickly whip through them. Jackson Archer was the Rising Star nomination last week, which I think is fantastic. He was just eligible in terms of his age and the games played, so fantastic for Jackson. Great reward for effort. His second half of the year has been fantastic, and last week he was pretty unlucky to miss out on the votes, from me at least, but yeah, great reward for effort for the Rising Star nomination. It's great to now have Archer. We've had McKercher nominated. We've had Wardlaw nominated. I hope I'm not missing someone. I don't think Zane's got a nomination. So great to have some nominations there. You want that as a young side to have plenty of players coming up and getting those nominations to show that you've got some potential. And yeah, I mean, he's not a chance to win it on the night. I think it's probably between Ollie Dempsey and George Wardlaw. And to be honest, I think probably Dempsey is in front at the moment. I don't think Wardlaw's had enough of a season in terms of games played and consistent footy to be deserving. But look, you never know. And the other bit of news from the week, Paul Curtis, Ollie Paul, has signed an extension to the end of 2028. So an extra 3 years. He was already signed up until the end of next year, but he's put pen to paper for another additional 3 years, which is fantastic. We're starting to see the young players that we know have some potential or have it signing on long term, which is fantastic. So great to lock Ollie Paul up. Hopefully we've also got some kind of oil subscription, or he's going to be maybe sponsored by some kind of oil, because I want to see him as oily as possible. That's how he plays his best footy. So hopefully the club can get that organised, get an oil sponsorship for him. If not, I'll see what we can do at North Pod to make that happen, because that's how he plays his best footy. So let's make sure we make that happen. And yeah, like fantastic. He had an up and down game, but he's had a great year. I think probably one of our most improved for the year. Certainly in terms of consistency, we've known that he's got it, but it's been about consistency for him, and I think he's been he's had a better level of consistency this year than he has in the past. Looking ahead to next week, we've got the Western Bulldogs, who it feels like we only played pretty recently, but that's what the AFL fixture is like. I don't get too caught up in it. We know that we only played Richmond for the first time last week, so whatever. We've got a Sunday game this time. We've had so many Saturday games in a row, but Sunday, August 18, a 1:10 game, so that early afternoon game. It is our last game in Melbourne for the year, so hopefully as many people as possible get along. The Dogs are trying to move their way up the ladder, but they're looking good for finals at this point. They are playing today, or later today as I record it, so I would assume that they're going to beat the Crows and more or less lock themselves into the 8, but they'll be looking to see if they can move a little further up, and who knows, maybe there's an upset there and the game next week is even more pivotal for them, but they're looking pretty good, you would think, and they certainly are a better side than us. In terms of who might come back, I mean, George Wardlaw, hopefully, if he's ready, but if he's not, I could also see just wrapping him up in cotton wool for the year. Stevenson and Stevens potentially could come back. Zachy Fisher is also another one, so plenty of potential options to come back. Griffin Logue we know is out for the year, unfortunately, so he won't be returning. Yeah, I think there's a couple of options there. The defence was not good, so I would like to see some change in that area, whether that's Zachy Fisher coming back in, whether or not that's Jaden Stevenson, I doubt it. But yeah, I'd like to see some kind of change back there. Maybe it is Toby Pink going back and we figure out something else in the forward line. I don't know. But the defence didn't look good today, or yesterday rather. And then my last note, I guess, there's 2 games left. We've got the Bulldogs this week, and then we've got the Hawks the week after. And you just have to start to question, with 2 games left against some teams that are playing way better footy than us, what do you value most? Do you try and stay as competitive as can possible and play what you think is your best 23 players? Or do you do a bit of experimentation and try and see what some players can give you in the last couple of weeks? We still have plenty of players out of contract that, decisions are going to have to be made on. So I'm just going to whip through a couple of them now quickly. Blake Drury is out of contract and hasn't got a look in for a long time. Lazaro, similar. Cooper Harvey hasn't played at all this year in the AFL and is out of contract. Hamish Free is out of contract. I wouldn't expect him to play. I'd expect either we sign him for another year as backup or we move on. He's not going to play AFL. Hugh Greenwood, we don't need to see what he's got, but he's out of contract, so he'll be a decision. Same with Liam Shields. They're more around, is there a senior spot available for them? Are we able to maybe pick up a different senior player that's maybe slightly younger or brings something slightly different to replace one or both of them? Robert Hansen Jr. has been in the side the last few weeks and, has played as the sub a couple of times, but, is potentially someone that we swap out for one of those other players to see what they've got. Tyler Sellers out of contract and playing in the VFL, so I don't really know. I'd love to see Tyler come back in just so he can actually get a touch and kick a goal. I know that's not what we should be thinking about right now, but I do feel bad for him. The 2 games that he played was pretty rough. Will Phil's the other one. He's obviously playing at the moment, but potentially might not if Georgie Wardlaw came back in. So, he's one that we've got to make a decision on. Finbar Maley, I think, or I assume, is out of contract. I don't expect that we'll be giving him the chop. And I don't expect that he'll get a game unless we do want to swap Pink forward and swap Pink to the back line and get another tall in that forward line. But playing Maley and Teakle, I think, is probably unlikely. Curtis Taylor is the only other one that's out of contract, but or that we need to make a decision on, but he's injured, so he won't be playing. Anyway, I guess it's just something to think about. Of that group, is there someone that you want to have a look at in this last couple of weeks? Personally, I'd love to get a look at Cooper Harvey because we haven't seen him at all this year, and if that's at the expense of Hansen Jr., who we've had a bit of an extended look at over the past month or so, look, we'll see what happens. I'm sure the club will be saying that they're aiming to win the last 2 games, but I think internally you'd have to be thinking a little bit about trying to to see what you've got so you can make those decisions. Because we are going to have to turn over a fair bit of the list at the end of this year. Most of those players that are listed probably aren't going to get a contract. So we've got to figure out from that list who is. And I think, if you've got one VFL game and 2 AFL games left to do that, I think it's important to at least try. Anyway, that's going to do us for the podcast. Probably a little bit longer than I wanted because it was such a heartbreaker. I didn't really want to have to talk about it for this long, so I do appreciate it if you've made it this far through listening. Try and stay positive. There's only 2 weeks to go, and the AFLW is starting up again. We've had some match sims, so we can start to look positively at that. We know we've got a really competitive AFLW side at least, so if the men aren't going well, at least the women, well, hopefully are. They certainly were last year. 2 weeks to go. Hope everyone has a fantastic week. Weather's starting to fine up a little bit. We're coming into the end of winter. Spring's about to arrive. So hopefully moods are on the up as well. And I will speak to you after the game next week at some point. As always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.